Now, before I give my brief overview of our proposal, can I please get a show of hands to see how many people here view global warming as a serious threat? Thank you. Okay, so we are ARC Solutions, and our goal is to raise awareness into the possibility of engineering our way out of a climate nightmare. We truly believe that the public's interest into the matter is of the highest importance if climate engineering techniques are to be in any way successful. Since global warming is a worldwide concern, no one single institution is responsible for, no one single institution is responsible, and we need to work together. Governments will need to reach an agreement on the seriousness of the matter and act much sooner rather than later. But before this can be achieved, the governments will need your support, the support of people like us, the support of everyday normal citizens of this planet. Okay, so here is a recent video clip by NASA, and if you just take a look, it shows how global temperatures have increased steadily over the last decade. Please take a moment. So as you can see, temperatures have increased a lot over the past century, excuse me. So knowing this, how have the public attitude translated to actions thus far?
So the current paradigm is that the global community has to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 80% in the next 50 years or so. So to put that in a financial perspective, for Britain to cut its emissions by 80% by 2050, it would cost them 18 billion a year. And these efforts would only make a difference if every nation was partaking. Like there's some nations that, like China, that are just increasing their emissions every year. Yeah, coal is the fastest growing energy sector in the world at the moment. So as greenhouse gases are increasing the temperature of the Earth, CFCs are eroding the ozone layer. And this is happening especially around the poles. And this is melting the poles and the tundra and the permafrost. And this is releasing a lot of trapped carbon and getting rid of a lot of white reflective surface area, which is only increasing global warming further. We've looked into three major strategies which can be used and implemented to immediately reduce the effects of global warming. These are stratospheric sulfur aerosols, which would be similar to what's spewed out by a volcano, and they would sit in the atmosphere and reflect away some of the sun's energy. Secondly, a space sunshade, which would be a physical structure about 1.5 kilometers in space, and that would reflect away some of the sun's energy again. And lastly, algal blooms, which would be achieved by fertilizing the ocean with iron dust, and the algae would grow rapidly and trap carbon as sugar, and they would sink into the bottom of the ocean. We're raising awareness in order to promote research in these strategies.
So, as Joy mentioned, research really is imperative within the context of our project. Complex computer models are really the epicenter of this research, and various examples, just the IPC, it was actually through implementation of these complex computer models that they came to the realization there needs to be a lot more effort, research, and action in this very contentious issue. But the most important, really, in my opinion, in this research is the elucidation of sort of the possible negative effects, consequences of various climate engineering methods. So, for example, as Joy mentioned, the stratospheric sulfur aerosols, despite their hefty proposed benefits, some possible consequences despite careful implementation would be drought, ozone depletion, alteration of surface circulation, and a real negative impact on the cloud formation. Even though these do seem quite severe, realistically they are extremely pale in the face of the catastrophic consequences which rampant climate change and global warming would propose. However, there are certain ways which these consequences can be managed. One, for example, within the stratospheric sulfur aerosols is the photophoric effect. An aerosol is a small particle suspended in a gas, and when they are circulating in the stratosphere, the sun will heat these particles unevenly, and therefore one pole, which will be heated more vigorously, will deflect the gas, causing more friction and meaning the particles can be more effective for longer times. So this really leads on to Ava, will be discussing how imperative public engagement is in terms of these research and consequences.
So it is really important to involve the public in the research process earlier rather than later, because as Mark said, there are several negative consequences, but there are also things that may overcome these negative consequences, and without involving the public, they might not be aware of all the things, and it could lead to a negative public opinion. So we decided that a survey was the best basis to start from to gauge the public's knowledge of global warming and its effects and their opinion of climate engineering. So the survey kind of confirmed our guess that not many people are aware of climate engineering. 81.4% actually had no idea that it existed. So we then gave people, we informed people about, we gave them a definition of climate engineering and several examples that the boys told you about. And then 67.4% said that they would support research into it. And I know 23.3% were unsure, which only leaves 7% who would not support research into it. We also, following up on the survey, we brought in focus groups, and kind of when we focus on the need for research, there was an 89% support for it, and we talked about the inevitability of this happening. So a major problem is who is going to oversee these programs if they come, if we have to bring them out. So we also polled people about this, and 27.9% thought that individual nations should oversee programs, whereas 72.1% thought that it should be international governance organisations, because in order for any plans to be implemented, there needs to be cooperation between the nations.
So we've heard lots about the spectacular failures of individual nation states and intergovernmental organisations to reduce emissions. And the big question is, how can we avoid these same pitfalls? But there are some advantages. We've heard about how the cost of climate engineering could be significantly less. We've also, well, there's obviously less incentive for industry to lobby against these changes. But there are unique problems posed by climate engineering solutions. Now, one of them is the fact that climate change won't affect all nations equally. As you all know, places like the Netherlands will be flooded very quickly, but some places could even benefit. So there's our good friend Vladimir Putin. One advantage that Russia could stand to have in the event of serious global warming is that the tundra areas or the boreal forests could become very suitable for agriculture, which at the moment they're not. In addition to that, there's the Northern Sea Channel, which could open up and enable cheap shipping routes, which would go much, much faster than going south. So that's one major challenge which impresses the need for rapid intergovernmental organizations. So as our respondents thought, it would be much more suitable for this to be addressed in the context of the UN. For this, we believe that it would be necessary for a separate body to be created as soon as possible. Things move slowly, and research takes time. There is finally the risk that if we don't do this, individual nations that are suffering as a result of climate change will engage in climate engineering by themselves. Now, there's all kinds of horrific scenarios that we can imagine, but it doesn't take a great leap of the imagination to see how if one nation starts to mess with the climate for its own interests and other nations start to try and compensate for this, we could see a massive escalation, which could result in lots of human costs as well as environmental costs. So we're primarily here to raise awareness about this issue. Our goal is to try and engage the public, determine what the public prioritizes, what the public wants, inform the public, but also inform researchers about the public's interests. So we're very curious to hear what anyone has to say, of course the judges especially. And thank you very much for your time.
Well done, guys. Very, very good. I'm just curious about, I'd be very concerned about the whole social engagement piece, and I'd like to know a little bit more about your survey, because, I mean, how you carried that out. I mean, you know, what groups were represented, something about demographics of people represented. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, we actually have a bit about it in our report. Unfortunately, we didn't get a great response, so it's only kind of a basis for further investigation. A lot of the respondents were students, so it's not really representative of the whole population, and we address that in our report. So further further research is needed.
Because you could imagine a struggling family who are finding it difficult in this recession to put food on the table. It'd be very difficult to engage them with something like this. You know? Whereas we all know that if ultimately it's going to affect them, and so that would be a difficult one. But I think that's great, and you've probably raised a huge issue in terms of you know, the internationalization of this, and if a program like this was to develop on a very large scale, that it, you know, it would have to create this balance between wealthy nations, less well-off nations, or whatever. So I think that's a challenge, but very well done, and you look like you work together very well as a team in it. So congratulations.
Thank you.